So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for November 17th, 2021. We'll follow the agenda that we had tagged in the issue, which was issue number 1122. Okay, so before we get started with the agenda, is there any announcements that people would like to share?
You just shut up. I'm gonna promote him.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. Okay, well, if there's no announcements this week, we'll move on to CPC and board meeting updates. I don't believe there's any updates from the board. Rich, do you have anything you want to share on the CPC side?
No, I don't think there was a meeting this week.
It was a working session, that is true. Okay, so let's move on to the issues tagged for the agenda. And we'll start out with the first one. And we have a guest, Guy Bedford, who's going to help us in the discussion on that one. It is update conditions, add Dino and types, number 40708. So Guy, do you want to start out by sort of framing the issue and what the discussion is about there?
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Let me know if I'm unclear at all. Sometimes these AirPods have switched onto the wrong microphone setting and it can be difficult to hear. Yeah, so Matteo brought up this one for the TSC. Originally, the concern was flagged by Jordan. So just to go into a little background on the issue for pull request 40,708. We, a little while back, realized that with these conditions in the package.json export and imports fields, which allow custom resolutions based on environment resolving in different environments, that there would be benefits in ensuring that conditions that aren't actually implemented in Node.js are still well defined. So Node.js only implements a few conditions itself: the import condition, the require condition, the node add-ons condition. So you can resolve specifically under these conditions. But there could be other conditions like a React Native condition or a browser condition is probably the most popular one as a kind of a modern version of the browser field. So we kind of thought about this early on and added a section to the documentation called conditions definitions. I'll just link it into the discussion now. There's the link in the documentation. And the original goal of this section of the documentation was that, okay, we've got these conditions in Node. Other people are going to start writing all these text conditions and using them and doing things with them. And we might have a role that we can play in ensuring that we're shepherding this properly in the ecosystem, so that as people are using these conditions, there's clear guidance on what these conditions are. Because there's a risk, if there isn't, that people just put all these things in their package.json resolution conditions, make up all their own stuff, and then they don't necessarily interoperate properly. So we can end up in a situation where my version of what a browser is different to your version of what a browser is. And now we're writing our packages with this browser resolution, and we're not clear on what that browser resolution is. And we saw a little bit of that happening. Webpack implemented a module condition, and then it wasn't clear, you know, if what that condition would mean and that kind of thing. So with everyone defining their own conditions, there's a coordination problem there. And so we created the section, so well, certain conditions we can list them as Node.js conditions that in the docs as a kind of sort of a community service. At the moment, we only have 3 listed: browser, development, and production. So none of those 3 are implemented in Node, but Node documents them and defines them in a well-defined way. And then we added some guidance for when conditions can be added to this list, so that based on certain criteria. For example, the definition should be clear and unambiguous for any implementer. The use case for why defining the condition helps should be justified. So, you know, it shouldn't just, there should actually be a coordination benefit to defining it. There should exist existing implementation usage of that condition. It shouldn't conflict. So trying to create some kind of guidance around that and how one could coordinate these conditions. And then the PR itself adds 2 new conditions to this list, which is a types condition, and the other one is a Dino condition. So there didn't seem to be much pushback against the types condition, which Angular recently released in their new package guidelines for package JSON. They're encouraging the types condition for pointing to typing files. And for example, by our listing it, it can help popularize that condition and help people ensure that they have typing for all of their separate resolutions.
For the notes, who was it again? Did you say added the types one?
Angular.
Angular. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they also have a few others that they defined, which we haven't listed, variations of JS versions and things like that. But I didn't want to open up that can of worms just yet. And then the Dino condition, Dino have implemented in their Node.js resolution interop layer support for the Dino condition. So you could have a version of your package export resolutions, which when running on the Dino platform, you can point to a different module and get a sort of a Dino native version. And so you can have these kind of universal patterns. And so those are the 2 I was looking to add as examples of community definitions where we can include the definition, clearly define it, and provide some kind of coordination service where we're maintaining that list as a public thing. Alternatively, this could be a list that could be taken out of the Node.js documentations and moved to its own project or repo somewhere. So that's the kind of thinking around it. And then Jordan had a remark saying, well, we shouldn't have a reference like this to Dino in the Node.js documentation, and Dino should document it themselves, and it's their responsibility to document. I don't believe they currently have it documented. So yeah, that's the kind of decisions, firstly around these conditions, if we want to continue down this path for Node.js in maintaining this as a kind of like a community listing of conditions and the process around that, or if we want to move it out somewhere, and then the guidelines around what conditions we want to list, and if we determine that other JS platform conditions are suitable to list or not. So I think those are the kind of questions here. Matteo, you were the one who were commenting on this. Did you want to maybe add some thoughts to that?
So there are 2 fundamental concerns for me. Okay, one, you was resolved in the change. Like, I'm fine with the current text as it stands. Okay, it's before that it was, well, it soft implies that we were supporting those things, while it's now clear that those are community additions, well-known community additions. Okay, anyway, so I am more it could probably be even more highlighted the fact that we have no responsibilities on how those are being handled. So that's more or less.
To clarify on that point briefly, based on that feedback, I added a commit to change the title of this conditions definitions section to community conditions definitions, and clarify it a bit that it is this coordination around almost third-party conditions.
Yeah, as long as it's like with that thing, I'm okay in listing it. Now, the second concern is more around branding and marketing and a bunch of things. So for a long time, we had the position of not mentioning Dino in any communication, mostly. So it's if that was, and we have been silent on it for the vast majority for over the course of these years. So that would mean changing that attitude. And if that's okay, then I am good with that take. However, it needs, I would like to give the opportunity to the TSC to, I think it's relevant enough that the TSC should double check if they want to if somebody wants to check on this. Like, it's not something.
Yeah, I don't know that
It's
we had a
not minor.
policy. I don't think we had a policy against it. It's just there was no reason to promote something else.
Yes, exactly. Well,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
like,
it was
so,
not. It was not official anyway. But
right. I think, like, my first question is this that's worth discussing here? Is this the right place to document these? Or, like, in my mind, it would be a natural fit for a repo under the OpenJS Foundation, where, you know, we want to, you know, this is like a registry of conditions across the JavaScript ecosystem, right? And that's like the OpenJS Foundation
exactly,
repos. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's exactly that kind of a thing. Originally, it's sort of, there was almost an effort to split off and create a package JSON spec by Devin from Parcel. And when that effort happened, there was a huge amount of pushback to having a package JSON spec in the ecosystem for some reason, or like managing it in one place. And so that we were, at the time, we were very aware of that, like trying to specify, like, as a generic package JSON spec can be difficult, but as a specific exports condition thing, it could become its own repo. The thing with that is just finding the people who are willing to maintain that on an ongoing basis and setting up process around it. I did create a call for contributors to such a thing to see if there was interest. And I did get interest from Derek, who's would potentially be able to be involved in that. At the moment, I don't have any other volunteers for setting up such an effort, but that could be an alternative.
I don't know if other TSC members have, you know, thoughts on, does this make sense in the Node project repos versus, you know, somewhere else?
I am fine in it staying in the Node project. I'm fine in it staying in the Node project repo.
I'm fine also if it stays in the Node project, but one point in favor of having it outside is that since it's not related to what Node supports, it doesn't need to be linked to the Node.js version on the documentation. So if we add Dino now, it will be in Node 17 documentation, but it will not be in Node 16 until we backport it.
Anybody else have any thoughts, preferences? I'm also wondering, I think maybe it was resolved in the issue. I didn't have a chance to read the issue to see how, you know, how it was changed since I think one of the concerns I also saw being raised was like documenting things that the projects haven't documented themselves. So I can see the concept of a registry, but it almost seems to me like the group's projects using these things should almost be involved in having them be added to the registry, right? versus, you know, us
Right.
just adding
Yeah.
ones that we see, right?
Ideally, it would be a process of those who want to coordinate on their conditions, kind of creating a PR and there being a process around that, and it being driven by the people defining the condition. We are kind of also bootstrapping a process here, as it were. So I'm always trying to just fill in examples to get the ball rolling on that as well, because at the moment that initiative isn't in place, but once you've got a few more, maybe it will be. Yeah, and it's really like trying to fill this coordination gap in the best way, and communicate that. And the Node.js docs are a great place to own that communication. If we did set it up as another thing, linking to it from the Node.js docs would be a great help. As I say, my concern with that is just getting that process set up, and that we could always move it across at any time, and that probably is what's going to happen eventually if things grow. But right now, it's still a bootstrapping process of making, you know, clarifying these patterns and developing these patterns and processes where people can see how these things can be put together and clearly defined. And yeah, so Dino is just a very good example, because it's a situation where there's a way you can write a package that can basically be compatible between these two environments. And so it's kind of the first example of that. So if you've got, you know, browsers and these clear definitions, we're kind of starting to build that pattern.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
suspect it would be relatively easy to get like an OpenJS repo. So like the mechanics of getting a repo and getting text in there, I guess the question is more about, like you're saying, in terms of like who can modify and add things, right? Is it that you think there aren't enough people? Like, is it that you need the node collaborators to be active in doing that? Because if it's somewhere else, that won't happen, or?
Yeah, exactly. That just the risk of it getting neglected or missed or dropped. Whereas in the Node.js documentation, there are constant eyes on it. And if it's something that people see changing over time and developing, then hopefully more process can be built around that. Yeah, so that's the kind of goal. So if this Dino topic is a kind of a tipping point to say we should separate it already, then we can certainly do that. It's just about not doing too much work up front, basically. So, you know, maybe this doesn't turn into such a big effort. It's difficult to predict what the future holds as well. Does anyone have any concerns specifically about the Dino listing, or is there any kind of marketing concern there that we genuinely need to think about? And I can completely appreciate if that is the case. And I think that was, you know, Jordan's and Mateo's point, that there is this question of branding, perhaps. If anyone feels uncomfortable about it, I think that's a useful wedge to kind of say, okay, well then let's split this out into a new OpenJS repo.
For me, it was more around like documenting something that they haven't documented themselves. Like that was the point that resonated with me. Like if it's not something that's been publicly discussed or documented in the project, it almost seems a little premature to include it in the list. That's where I was coming from. Like, you know, ideally there'd be some, you know, the project defining one of these things would actually be involved in adding it and saying, yeah, that's something that we actually support and want to reserve that namespace.
Yeah, if it would help, I could try and see if there's interest from the Dino side in actually pushing for this, to actually indicate that they intend to to see this definition clearly defined. Does that help?
I guess yes, and the same question applies to the types condition. If the TypeScript project isn't interested in supporting it, then why should we add it?
Yeah, I mean, it's bootstrapping a coordination effort, as I say. So the first few people aren't aware that they have the ability to create to engage in this process, and I think some degree of coordination is important because types could mean like a lot of things to a lot of people, and by making sure that we have these very clear definitions that are maintained and are very carefully considered from an interop perspective, we can make sure we avoid confusions down the road where things are not clearly defined, or packages end up in situations where they're not behaving correctly in different environments and things like that. So types, we do have on the review of that PR at the moment, Wes Wiggum from TypeScript, who's been working on the ESM integration of the Node ESM integration for TypeScript, and following the Node resolution in TypeScript. So he's exactly the one who's been on that, and he's from what I've seen from the reviewer so far, okay with us landing it. He's not actively pushing for it. I could try and get engagement from Angular as well to get an okay from them that they're happy with our definition, and that could possibly also demonstrate engagement on that one. I mean, I think if that's the criteria to see that there's demonstrated implementer interest of the people who are actually implementing these things, that sounds like a perfectly valid criteria to make sure that we're checking off on in these PRs, and also generally as a process.
Kind of neutral on this issue, but it kind of feels out of scope for Node Core per se. Like, are we the ones that should be deciding what these modules mean?
Right. So you know, as the project that is effectively specified these resolution behaviors, it was the natural home to shepherd these community conditions. But certainly it's as I say, if there's a strong wedge argument for why we should not be maintaining this in Node Core, it can drive a separate repo. So yeah, I'm just following the path of least resistance, as it were, to try not to over-engineer anything.
If we look just from Node, what Node cares about, which ones are relevant? I guess types, development, production.
So we've
Not even sure we. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Sure. Mitseo, you go first.
Well, like Node does not care about any of them in very strict terms. Okay.
Like, which ones are relevant in a Node developer perspective? Like browser that's relevant.
Types.
Yeah, that's the one, right?
Yes. The other two, I don't even know which tools use them. To be honest, I don't know who use development and production
So browser will be resolved by bundlers when building for the browser. And development and production are supported in Webpack, and were coordinated in the Node.js docs during that time.
I feel, for example, browser, I think that's more up for the bundlers to decide, you know, okay, we all agree that there is a type called browser and what that means. Like, yeah. I think for us, I think it makes sense for us to document types. Like, types are relevant for Node development, and we define what that means in our opinion. And the other types, you know, the ones that are the stakeholders for the type there should be the ones that are defining it, in my opinion.
And they are the ones who define it. The point is that they need to be defined somewhere central so that stakeholders have a place to define it. And if everyone defines their own things on their own projects, we do risk a coordination problem where, you know, people come up with different meanings for browser. What's a browser? Who defines what a browser is, right? So we're kind of trying to play some role in that.
I think the basic idea is good. I'm just not sure Node Core is the place for it. But yeah, I'm neutral. It's just my thoughts on the matter.
Okay.
Okay, so
yeah.
I think there's been a good discussion, and maybe we should, you know, we've used a fair amount of time. It sounds to me like the two key questions to answer are like, you know, do we think it should be in Node Core or a separate repo, and then like adding the criteria of having like some feedback from the project to say, yeah, we're, you know, what you're defining there makes sense because in the places that define it. You know, it's, I'm just trying to think like, what are the concrete next steps on those two things? You know, if we added that criteria and got some feedback from, you know, the Dino and from the types projects, would everybody here be comfortable landing it in the Node repo to start? Or is it, you know, something we'd prefer to explore, you know, putting it in an OpenJS repo or something like that?
We can start with landing it in Core and then move it out, I guess.
I'm happy to go with that, and to say that if it grows significantly, that it then can move out to its own project when there's enough momentum to sustain that. And I'm happy to have that as there's already a note that it would be moved out to its own place in future. So I think we can align on that and agree that that's what happens eventually. And then for now, I can aim to get implementer validation for these before landing further.
That would make sense. So that sounds good to me in terms of the implementer validation. Could you also ask them if they'd more likely to be actively contributing if it was outside of Core? Because I think that would be some good feedback as well.
Okay, I'll make sure that gets discussed as well.
Okay, thanks. Okay, anything else that people want to bring up or discuss on that one before we move on to the other issues on the agenda? If not, thanks. Thanks, Guy, for helping to come and have this discussion, and we'll move on to the next issue. The next issue is renamed default branch from master domain. We still have a few, and I'm not sure if there's been any progress on any of those. I haven't had a chance to take a look recently. Anybody else have any updates they want to share? Okay, no updates on that one. The next one is 30697, migration of core modules to primordials. I think Jarish, you were leading the effort to define a vote on that one.
That's right. So I have opened 1104 in TSC repo to track the voting process. We have come around 3 viable options for voting, but in one of the earlier instances, Ruben suggested that he want to present additional cases or you know, some of the views that were missed in earlier discussions. And he has actually come up with a number of options, basically concrete options for the TSC to consider. So that's all documented in the issue. I was hoping that we can have a discussion here. I don't see Ruben in the meeting. So
Yeah, I don't think so.
He's not here.
Yeah, my viewpoint to this elaborate list of options is that in the very first place, we went with a confined discussion with SMEs on this topic, was to basically zero down the options to 1 or 2 most meaningful choices, so that TC can deliberate and have a look and you know, sway on either side. This looks exhaustive list to me, and it is a kind of all the combinations that are possible, and then we might end up a very scattered kind of voting, or we might want to answer all the questions that we actually discussed. So probably the most reasonable 1 or 2 or 3 options coming up for voting looks good to me. If we are not yet there, we should do some more work and present top 3 options to the TSC for voting.
So I was looking at those options earlier today, and I think those 3 are not very meaningful. Because I don't think anyone actually is advocating for option 2, at least not as far as I've understood. And option 1 and option 3 basically leaves us where we are, with an ambiguous decision on what we're doing.
Option 1 is to migrate a subset only, whereby the subset is not yet fully formed. So that's where we wanted assistance from people like Bradley and Jordan, etc., who were advocate for this option in a strong manner, but they had their own reasons why they want to have the primordials for security and robustness perspective. So option 1 is not fully formed, while I can agree that option 2 and option 3 are loose. We could revisit that and tighten those. But all my point is, having 10 options for TSC to vote, I can very well see how the outcome is going to be. It can be inconclusive.
I feel having a vote on those 3 is not meaningful.
So there's the question of having a vote on those 3 in particular, and the question of having a vote on 3. In other words, it's I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Girish, that Girish's point is that expanding it to 10 or 12 options is not going to have a good result when brought to the TSC. People won't engage, and it will take a long time to come to a decision. If we'll face the same potential for impasse and deadlock that the larger community has faced with this discussion, and so on and so forth. So the idea was that subject matter experts would reduce it to 2, 3, maybe 4 of the most compelling options, and maybe those maybe this list of 3 options is not that list yet, and it needs a little more work. But I definitely agree with what I think Girish is saying, which is that we do not want to bring like 10 or 12 options to the TSC.
Well, there is also the fact that if we vote in the same way we voted for promises, in fact, we can support as many.
Yeah, we can support many options, but will people engage? I mean, I understand. We can do ranked choice. We can support 3, 4, 5 options. But if there's 10, 12, 15 options,
I agree. But so the comment that Ruben was bringing is, and Ruben wants to say, it's not just about primordials, okay? So, for example, you can say that you want a tamper-free module system, and if you want a tamper-free module system, you could, as Bradley was saying in a few of the calls, you could say that you could re-implement all of that in C++, and then it's tamper-free. You don't need to use primordials.
Yeah, it's the outcome we should vote on here, right?
Well,
what did you want to try to achieve?
I mean, I guess we could vote on the outcome, but part of deciding the outcome is deciding whether the cost of the outcome is worth it. Like, yeah, I want tamper-free modules. Do I want tamper-free modules at the cost of massively more complicated implementation and much worse performance? I might not, or maybe I would. I don't know. But like, it's the trade-offs that need to be considered, and that those are going to involve implementation details, I think.
Yeah. But that's part of, whether we vote yes or no on a specific issue part, right?
Is there other goals than like the tamper-free, like in terms of primordials, tamper-free is the goal, right?
Yes, so you can decide that you want tamper-free Node.js overall, or which is implement primordials everywhere. You can decide that you want tamper-free. Personally, I don't understand how that could help, because we have you could basically wreck Node.js in a lot of ways, even though the internals are tamper-free. Okay, like as long as you have access to async hooks and a few other things, all bets are off. Okay, there would be a lot of tampering. Like it's a very large surface area. Okay, that's what I meant.
Right.
And that's the first one.
So the next one, like tamper-free everywhere, but then the next one is tamper-free just for module loading.
And then there is tamper-free for module loading. Yeah.
And then there would be like nowhere, right?
Well, it is another thing, and it's what has been done so far. It's better if it's tamper-free, but if there are a lot of performance cliffs, don't do it. Okay.
Impact on APM.
Impact on APM. Like if there are concerned on reason why not something needs to be done, don't do it. Okay.
From a practical perspective, the way I see this, doing everything primordials and doing nothing as primordials are not viable options, because it shows no compromise. So basically what we have to decide is, what do we make tamper-proof? Not if we make everything or nothing. It's more about what do we do tamper-proof. Otherwise, no one is we'll have people that are very unhappy. So we need to find a compromise solution here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
earlier we
example,
actually started
async
working on
hooks would
migration.
be. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We somewhat stopped the migration work because we came across the performance ditches, and probably performance is not a real reason is where we are going to. Instead, the tamper-free modules such as loaders are taken very seriously, and then we look at the objective as which are the critical modules that should be migrated, which are not so much critical, etc. So that's what the option one is shaping up to.
I pasted two, like maybe we need two questions, I was thinking. Like we could have, we could have a vote on what our goal is. Like, and we talked about tamper-free everywhere, just for module loading, selectively if possible without negative performance, or nowhere, right? That might be one question. Then separately, I could see like, okay, how do we want to achieve that, through primordials or moving code to C++? Because those are almost like two different dimensions, right? Like what do we want to set as a goal? And then separately, how do we think getting to that goal makes sense? Is that?
No, I don't want to push this too, but of those four you just mentioned, I think three of them are not viable. The one where we do everything tamper-free, not viable. The one where we do nothing tamper-free, not viable. The one we only make those things that are not performance sensitive tamper-free. The amount of work it takes to ensure it doesn't have any performance impact, and when it does, the amount of work we need to do to figure out why that had a performance impact is not viable. So the only thing viable is we need to decide what we think is important to be tamper-free.
Right, okay, so
maybe I'm a bit too absolute in my opinion there, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, one consensus or good number of folks agreed is that performance is probably not a big reason to consider here. So eventually when we go for voting, look at migration with performance in consideration, look at migration with tamper-free critical modules as the primary consideration. Maybe these are two options that can go for voting.
Why is performance not relevant here?
I think, Grace, are you saying that would be an option to vote on, or that performance is? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, that's one of the options to vote for, because both Bradley and Jordan was kind of, I mean, they were quite confident to say that if we are looking at tamper-free Node.js platform as opposed to the browser, and certain aspects, if they are coming for exposure, then security should not be a consideration or a comparison parameter at all.
Right. So to summarize what I believe is, for example, Bradley's position. Performance. Basically, what you said. Performance should not be a consideration. This is if people want, hyper performant, whatever, they're probably not using Node. Is kind of the general argument, and I don't know that that's true, but that is, but I also don't think he's the only person who would make that case. So yeah, that might be worth.
Yeah, I mean, if we are talking about the performance ditch, which we are measuring from the currently established baseline, that baseline is actually established on top of a tamper vulnerable platform. So their argument is that first let's make it tamper free on certain critical modules, then establish the performance baseline, rather than using the current performance as the baseline and stop.
Yeah, and then Jordan's position, as I understand it, is that correctness is what needs to be given primacy over performance. That monkey patching something, tampering with prototypes should not affect behavior of Node core, and if it does, that's a bug in his perspective. Now both of those positions, though, I don't think have any traction on the TSC. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of that. So like we can include those options, but I don't think anybody on the TSC is going to actually support those options. I think it's basically what Robert was saying, which is that nobody here, I don't think, is going to say that we need to implement primordials everywhere effectively. And therefore, I mean, has the decision already? I mean, has the decision already been made? I guess is a question, which is that is the decision that we need to decide that some things get primordials and some things don't, and then the question, and then the hard question is like, how do we make that decision? Like, how do we decide? Because the way we were doing it, which is implement it, measure performance, and hope, really, really deeply wasn't working for the project. And I see Antoine has his hand up, so I'll stop talking so he can say something.
Thank you. So if I remember correctly, Bradley's point was about the ESM module system, not the entirety of core. So I don't know if that changes what you were saying, but his point was we should have some things
tamper-proof, and then do the performance baseline for. And yeah, it's not moving everywhere. Then he had some specific modules in mind when he was saying that.
Yeah, I apologize if I misrepresented or overstated what his position was.
I mean, I think that can make sense. Like in the module loading system, performance there, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't affect so much most contributors. So I would be neutral on that specific. So that's why I mean.
But the thing where it's complicated, it's the module system uses other core modules such as FS and other stuff. I don't have the full list, but it's all the dependency of the module system would need to be tamper-proof as well. Otherwise, it's not effective security-wise.
To get along here, I would like to have like a list of modules that we would like to have this in. And then it's easier to discuss, okay, it makes sense here, it doesn't make sense here, or, module systems, that would be nice, but what are the dependencies that also need to be? And, if it's not so many, okay, no problem. If it's a huge lot of things, then maybe that's more up for discussion. Yeah.
I think we've spent a fair amount of time. We only have 8 minutes left. So is there a last little bit of discussion we can have here to help move forward before we move on to the next issue?
I believe it makes sense for Ruben to pitch in his proposals and then look at which are the modules that TSC believes are super critical in terms of correctness and a tamper-free behavior. And then with that, we can revisit the options with Ruben's concurrence as well, and then go for voting.
Okay. And I'm just going to add my last 2 cents that I really think it comes back to, and I think this bit what Ronag is saying too, is like it comes back to where and how. Like those are 2 questions that are key. Like where is it that we think it's appropriate, and then how would we do that?
Yep.
So if we had questions that basically had the feasible options in those 2, that might move us forward.
Sure.
Okay, so let's move on to the next issue. The next one is add security triaging to core repo, governance and/or charter. Rich, I think you've been working on that one. Do you have an update you'd like to share or anything we should discuss?
Yeah, I'm trying to put together a meeting for people who have suggested that they might have time to do some triage. And I think I got replies from everybody except for Danielle and Robert. So please reply to the doodle poll or send me an email or something, or I'll follow up with you later today if you don't. So don't worry about it. So that's the update.
Okay, thanks. Next one is mini summit, November 18th, which is tomorrow. So it's 10 to 2 Eastern. Would really be great to have people from the TSC there to discuss, what, if anything, we should be thinking about doing for types and for creating single binary EXEs. So on the agenda as an FYI, I don't think anything more really to add on that one. The issue's there if you're interested in showing up. At this point, we have 5 minutes left, and I would like to spend a few minutes in the private session. So I would suggest we skip the strategic initiatives unless there's anything key that people want to add on that front.
I don't see emoji reactions, so I'm saying yes.
Okay, so in that case, I thank you everybody who was watching on the live stream.